"You will not be allowed to press that button," Tom said, his voice sharp and half amused. Harold Mitchell was 83. He moved like a man who had practiced careful steps for years, palms folded over a small brass token. The museum hall smelled of lacquer and old orders. Rows of plaques caught the light like thin metals. The gray machine loomed, a hulking shape with a history stitched into its rivets. Harold stood close enough to see his reflection, small and steady, in the tank's pitted flank. Tom hovered with a torch and a clipboard. Polite and guarded, he tapped the plate, a service routine note, then lifted an eyebrow at Harold's hand on the steel. Harold did not introduce himself twice. He set the token down and let his fingers follow a seam. The token had a thin stamped number and a worn name written in a hand that matched his own. He said the name as if reading an address, low and precise, and the sound did not leave the air. Nobody in the gallery expected the tank to answer. A faint sequence chimed from within the bulkhead, an old boot chime, like a memory trying out a voice. Tom straightened, clipboard forgotten, and called for the maintenance room to run diagnostics. Harold smiled without amusement, his eyes fixed on a hatch that had not so much as twitched. He remembered a workshop and a lamp, a circuit chart pinned with masking tape, a man who argued about rules in a voice that still fit his ear. A volunteer passed, carrying a tablet, and the display blinked into life with an access log. The top entry was dated 1973, a string of code and a signature initial that matched the token in Harold's palm. People gathered, drawn by a small sound and a larger silence, the kind that rearranges the room. Tom spoke then, cautious and practical, and asked what Harold did in 1973 as if a date could settle a past. Harold answered with a single sentence about machines needing to know who they spared, and his voice held the weight of someone who had learned this by carrying it. The tank hummed again, a sequence of lights tracing a path along its flank, like a name being spelled out in motion. No one could say why the machine answered like that, as if a name had been spoken. And the question settled above them all. Lucy bent over the tablet, eyes quick, hands steady. She tapped the log and the screen bloomed into timestamps, terse entries, and a final edit note. The top line read 1973, a coded string, then a single initial. Lucy looked up and held the tablet so Harold could see. Tom cleared his throat, clipped. "Who are you to touch it?" he asked. Harold turned the brass token in his palm, the worn number catching the light. He said he had soldered circuits, taught a machine the cadence of mercy. Lucy scrolled and found an audio reel labeled Field Test. She pressed play and a crackled voice filled the gallery with orders and a pause. The voice named a small town, then ordered to withhold fire. Silence folded the room like a held breath. Michael arrived with a folder stamped restricted, his steps careful. He opened it and showed a photocopy, a looping signature that matched the token. Harold watched the paper as if tracing a map. His thumb found a familiar crease, a small gesture that spoke of long work. Marjorie stood at the edge, a veteran called in by a volunteer. She stepped forward and said she remembered the convoy, the halted guns, the faces they had saved. Her voice put flesh on the reel. It named an officer and a choice made in private. Michael's jaw tightened, the folder suddenly heavier in his hands. Lucy tapped the tablet and revealed edits made in 1973, then a decade of silence. Tom spoke up with institutional caution. "We need protocol and legal review," he said. Harold traced a weld with his fingertip and answered without looking. It was a council decision. His voice held the steadiness of someone who had carried a command. The museum murmured, people taking sides in small practical phrases. Lucy found another file, a scanned memo with the commander's hand and a broken seal. The memo requested mercy in coded form, asking engineers to teach a limit that spared civilians. Harold nodded as if hearing the order again inside him. Lucy replayed the reel and let the pauses breathe, each gap a decision recorded. The audio held technical jargon, then a simple clause about saved civilians, spoken like a terse log entry. Michael looked at Harold and asked directly, "Were you the engineer?" Harold met his gaze and said, "I signed it." A volunteer began taking photos for the archive, hands trembling. Michael warned of media interest, the word media landing like a pebble that rippled. Lucy said we must preserve originals, not overwrite, and she made a copy. Tom nodded as if buying time, as if counting what the museum could risk. Tom listed the steps: log, chain, copies, each word a closure attempt. Marjorie touched Harold's sleeve and said, "He kept his promise." Her words landed with a warmth that shifted the room, not by law, but by memory. Questions multiplied, more documents to check, more hands reaching for the file drawers. The discovery had strengthened the claim and sharpened the stakes. The gallery felt smaller, and the tank's unexpected voice hummed under it all, waiting for an answer. Michael arrived with a folder and a measured step, the room tightening. He laid the photocopies on the table and let the paper speak. He pointed to a looping signature that matched Harold's token. Lucy leaned in, fingers hovering, and the gallery listened. Tom cleared his throat and said, "We must keep protocols," his voice thin. He watched Harold with the kind of doubt that files itself into procedure. Harold touched the paper as if it were the edge of a map he had once walked. He did not raise his voice. He said the year and a place, precise and small. Michael folded his hands and asked why no one remembered the field test. He asked as accusation, and the air became a courtroom pace. Harold answered with the detail no one expected. The name of an officer who argued for mercy. His words landed, practical and undeniable. The tank's hum deepened, and a line of code scrolled on Lucy's tablet, a heartbeat of logic. Lucy replayed the old audio, and something in it matched the rhythm of Harold's speech. Michael's polite mask cracked into something sharper. He said the documents were classified. The museum could be liable. And his sentences stacked like bricks. Harold reached into his jacket and produced a thin, sealed envelope, edges dark with age. He set it on the photocopy and slid it to Michael. Marjorie stepped forward and told of a convoy, halted by orders that never reached the papers. Her memory named streets, a ruined bridge, and a child who was spared. And that naming made the reel breathe again. Michael opened the envelope and read a clipped order with the commander's initials beside it. The room narrowed to the small exchange between old paper and men used to paper. Lucy watched the tank as if it might nod in agreement, and the tank's lights matched Harold's breathing. Michael stood and placed the folder between them as if it were a barrier and a bridge. He said someone must verify signatures, witnesses, chain of command, and his words were meant to stall. Harold's face had the patience of someone who had waded through many bureaucracies and found them slow but porous. He tapped a small panel on the tank, and the machine answered with a voice shaped like his phrase, the cadence he had taught. The voice was not loud, it was timing and emphasis. A spoken line the room recognized as his rather than as machine. Silence arrived then, heavy and guilty, and the gallery made a sound like a collective exhale. Michael looked as if he had been struck, his plan of papers undone by a machine, remembering a man. Lucy made a note, not for the record, but so she would not forget how the tank had said the line. Marjorie touched Harold's sleeve and said quietly, "He kept his promise," and the words settled. The highest moment hung between them, the proof of a name taught to iron and code. Questions multiplied then, but the first had been answered by metal, remembering a voice. Michael left the folder open, and the photocopies fluttered like small flags. He pointed to a redacted line and pushed the paper toward Lucy with a quiet insistence. Lucy leaned over and traced the ink with a fingertip, then scrolled another file into view. A memo with a torn seal lay exposed, its header stamped with a command code and a name. The header had been hidden for decades, and its edges still smelled of handling. Marjorie took a step closer and rested a palm on the table as if to steady the past. She said the convoy had been small, only a handful of lorries, and that someone had chosen to stop them. Her words made the reel feel less like evidence and more like witness. Michael folded his hands and said calm will not excuse truth, his voice thin with policy. He warned of legal exposure and of committees that moved slowly. and his caution widened the room. Harold tapped the envelope and opened it with a patience born of habit. He produced a field report, typed tight, a line that read, with the bluntness of orders, "Cease fire. Protect civilians." The report bore initials and a notation that this had been an authorized deviation. Lucy read the notation aloud in a low voice, and the notation sounded like an admission. Tom watched and said we must follow chain of custody. He spoke protocol like prayer. His emphasis made the board somewhere beyond the gallery seem near and watchful. Marjorie added a page from her journal and named a village the report had never named. Her handwriting bent the sterile facts into people and places. The journal turned procedure into faces. A volunteer whispered of a redaction list and a cover memo that had been quietly archived. Lucy tapped her tablet until a new scan blinked into life, revealing a test log with human annotations. The test log told of conditional thresholds and of a routine designed to hesitate at civilian presence. It read like a mechanical conscience, a clause that measured life against orders and chose life. Michael swallowed and said, "Actions must be proven. Witnesses called, signatures verified." He spoke law and duty, and his words set the gears of process in motion. Harold moved closer to the tank and ran a thumb along a seam where his solder had once met steel. He said the choice had been painful then and necessary, and he did not ask for pity. Lucy found a second tape where an engineer had noted the algorithm in plain language, and his note bore Harold's initials. The tape played a dry voice, admitting uncertainty, and then a terse line about stopping fire to spare civilians. Marjorie sighed and told of children sheltering under a bridge, and the detail made the room turn inward. Her memory turned metal into memory, and memory into responsibility. The moral weight settled on the gallery like a verdict that had not yet been handed down. Someone would have to explain why Mercy had been filed away, and who had chosen the filing cabinet over the public. Michael folded the folder, and his voice tightened. "This will go to the board." He said proofs must be verified, and witnesses called. Lucy copied originals, her fingers steady, the tablet humming. She said the files must not be overwritten, and she made 2 secure copies. Tom spoke of caution and committees, his words thin with institution. He suggested legal counsel, and his tone shrank the room. Harold asked for one thing. He wanted to open what lay inside the tank. He walked the length of the flank, and his palm found a seam. They unlocked the hatch, and Michael eased out a small metal packet, lacquered with time. The packet was wrapped and sealed with the commander's stamp. Harold slit the seal and unfolded a single sheet, typed and blunt. It read like an order and an apology in one. The note asked engineers to teach restraint, to build a hesitation for civilian presence. It bore initials matching Harold's and a commander's scroll endorsing the deviation. Lucy read the line, and the words landed in the gallery as new facts. A volunteer took a photograph, and the shutter sounded like a verdict. Marjorie said she had seen a convoy stop because someone chose not to shoot. Her memory named a bridge and a child's face, and the report became human. Michael blinked, and his bureaucratic mask shifted toward understanding. He said the board will convene, but the record must change. Tom listed steps to authenticate the packet, and his list sounded like duty. He set the chain in motion, and the practical work began. Harold climbed into the bay and traced controls he had soldered. He spoke the sequence aloud, the phrases he had trained into the machine. The tank moved with a small choreography, its systems obeying a hand they recognized. It rotated its barrel and then lowered, a motion like a salute. A boot chime sounded, a name made into sound, and it hit the gallery like memory. Marjorie whispered the name, and it bridged grief into meaning. Lucy sent a secure copy to a journalist waiting outside, and the word spread. The clip showed the tank speaking one line, and the line carried a man's cadence. The journalist phoned, and his editor asked for context, then ran the clip on the evening feed. Families from the named village sent small notes, thanks and questions. Lucy stayed late, cataloging copies, and she made a list of witnesses to interview. The museum prepared an exhibit note and a public statement to explain the discovery and the provenance of the packet today. Michael closed his folder and said the public will judge, the law will test, and history will record. His voice held caution, but the shift underfoot was plain. Harold folded the packet and placed it back into the metal box, hands steady. He said the machine had done what he asked, and that was enough. People left with questions, but the gallery had altered a man's past. The tank remained. Quiet now, a machine that remembered a name and returned it to the world. Harold's story asks us something uncomfortable. How many other acts of mercy lie buried in archives? Waiting for someone brave enough to remember history isn't just what we're told, it's what we choose to uncover. If this story moved you, I'd be grateful if you'd share it. Someone out there might have their own Harold, their own untold chapter of quiet heroism. And if you know a story like this, one that deserves to be heard, leave it in the comments below. Until next time, remember the most powerful stories aren't always the loudest ones.